Hello, this is Kwon, the Connection Counselor, and welcome to the very first episode of the Charisma Chronicles, the show where we help you to actually get more charisma. Now, what is the challenge of getting more charisma? I had a colleague who asked me one day, he said, Joe, what is charisma and can it be taught? And here's the interesting thing. He had been thinking about this and researching this and looking it up on the internet and reading books about it for quite some time. And he hadn't really gotten to a satisfactory answer. So what he had found was a lot of lists, right? Like people love lists and checklists of things you should have or do to be more charismatic. So it could be something like make eye contact or listen or be very present when you're with someone. And those things I think are all great and they're important, but they actually don't make you charismatic. And what he found and what you may find is it's challenging because one, it isn't actually the thing that makes you charismatic, and two, it makes you a little bit awkward because you're trying to be more charismatic or do something, and half of your brain power is spent trying to remember this list instead of just being natural and being yourself. But that doesn't solve the problem, right? The problem is, how do you actually be more charismatic? And charisma is so elusive that even people who are charismatic can't explain to you how they do it, right? If you know someone really charismatic and you said to them, it's a little weird, don't do this, but if you said to them, why are you so charismatic? What do you do? What do you think they'll say? They'll just say, I don't know, I'm just myself. Or they may give you some things that they do, like they try to be considerate or something like that, and you think to yourself, I'm pretty charismatic, but no one finds me. I'm very considerate, but no one finds me charismatic, right? So you can do all these things on a list, you can try to copy all these attributes that other people have, but that's not the actual mechanism that makes you charismatic. So without that, if you don't know why something works, you can't get more of it, right? So that's where we're going to start today. We're going to start with a practical definition of charisma, which actually explains why people are charismatic. And that definition is charisma is the ability to sense and ultimately deliver exactly what is needed from an emotional perspective in a given moment. So let me say that again. Charisma is the ability to sense and ultimately deliver exactly what is needed from an emotional perspective in a given moment. So if you agree with that, hit the like button below. If you don't, leave a comment and tell me why you think this definition is no good. I love to get the feedback and would love to improve things as we go along. So, how does this work in real life? So let's imagine you go to a party and you're there with some friends and you arrive at the party and just everyone looks really bored. There's just no movement or energy or laughter or barely any conversation in the room. And you sense this and you say, man, this party's dead. Are you charismatic at that point? No, you're just as observant as everyone else in the room. You can tell that the party's no fun. So what would make you charismatic, right? The charismatic person in this instance is the one who brings the energy to the party. And here's one of the keys to charisma. It doesn't matter what the actual thing is, right? It's not like being great in conversation or being able to like tell jokes or play, great music and be a great DJ is a golden key that always makes you charismatic. It's what connects with these people in this situation, what you can bring to help them move to a place that emotionally is where they really need to go, which is to be in the flow of life and fun and friends and to really be enjoying this time together. Now, if you can do that, you will be perceived as charismatic. So let's switch it up and go to a different scenario. Let's say you're in a hospital, unfortunately, and there is a friend or a family member who is quite ill and everyone's waiting for a diagnosis. So friends and family have all gathered around and you're waiting to hear from the doctors what's going on. Now, let's say you were that charismatic person at the party. Is that what you should bring here in this situation? Would that make you charismatic for this situation and this group of people? I think you know the answer. No, that's ludicrous. Why would you do that? People would think that you're so insensitive and that you're a jerk, right? So instead, in this scenario, what would make you charismatic? You sense what? You sense that people are in pain, people are concerned, they're worried about their friend or family member. And where do they need to be emotionally, right? They need to be comforted. They need to have faith. They need hope, right? So the person who can bring that, whether it's you or let's say an uncle or an aunt who's just sort of the real steady, person in the family, or it could be a religious, figure who supports your family. That person, when they bring that to everyone and kind of help them feel more at peace and feel better about what's going on, that person will be perceived as charismatic. So you can see by this example that charisma isn't something that resides inside you all the time, like a magic credit card you just whip out and you swipe it and charisma's there. It really has to do with the situation at hand. And it's an invisible force between you and the other people, right? So there's a relationship going on there. And depending on the situation and what's required, different things will need to be brought out to be charismatic. Now, one thing that I love is listening to other people's perspectives and their stories so I can learn from them and sort of integrate them into my thinking. So I've started a segment of this show called the Charisma Corner, where I interview a guest to get their thoughts about charisma and see what we can learn from them. So my first guest is my good friend and colleague, Janice Riley, who will share with us some of her insights on charisma. So here we go. Charisma Corner with Janice Riley. All right, this is Joe Kwon, the Connection Counselor. I'm here with my good friend and colleague, Janice Riley. Janice, if you wouldn't mind, introduce yourself. Tell folks a little bit about what you do.
I am Janice Riley, as Joe said, and I work in learning and development in KPMG. And I help people determine their needs and then find solutions, training solutions that help meet those needs.
Yeah, so I've been lucky enough to do some co-facilitation with Janice on a course that she actually created, The Art of Networking. So that's how I've gotten to know her and learn a lot from her in the areas of learning and development. So today we're here to talk on Charisma Corner a little bit about charisma experiences. So just wondering, from your experience, Janice, what has been a time perhaps that you encountered someone who was super charismatic, or you felt that your charisma really came through in a pinch in a certain situation?
That's a good question. It's not something that we often think about or reflect upon, but now that you've asked me that, I would say for me, when I was particularly charismatic, I don't consider myself charismatic, but if you made me think about a time that I was, it would probably be one time when I was facilitating a meeting of people of very different backgrounds and different functions in our group, in our team, and all had very different opinions. And I had to sort of show a little bit of an energy that I would not have normally had in this particular instance, I think, because I need to wrangle a lot of different opinions. And so I kind of had to stand up and grab a pen and a marker and just got to the flip chart, and I just said, hold it. And I kind of corralled the group in a way that I had from my own, I think, energy, and maybe it was charisma, and humor and questioning technique, that I got people to answer my questions in a way that I captured all these different bits of input and feedback, and we actually were able to come to some sort of agreement after a lot of contentious conversation. But I was actually standing and walking around the room and tapping people and looking them in the eye, and I was trying to get everyone engaged, and it was something that I really hadn't been doing before, because anytime I had done something like this, I was just sitting at a table and I was just taking notes and sort of running the meeting from a seated position. But that wasn't working because there was so much else going on. So I had to stand up and look people in the eye. I had to touch them. I had to, get them to, speak to me in a way that was a little bit more professional, because they were a little angry in some respects. So that would be one time that I would say what my charisma helped.
Well, that is a really great example. I love the mention of the energy that you had to bring to it, the fact that you maybe even physically changed your position and your orientation to people. One thing I'm curious about is you shifted out of your default mode. What was kind of going on inside you or in your mind right before you made that decision to stand up and make a shift?
I think I was seeing that what my default mode wasn't working, and as it normally had in previous meetings.
So you adapted.
So I did adapt to the new situation. Exactly. It was conscious.
And what do you think was sort of missing in the room, right? Because normally your normal default mode would have worked, but something had shifted for this particular meeting. What do you think was kind of that missing element?
Well, I think the missing element was, I think people came in with different expectations. That was, part of it. And then we had to kind of regroup, wait, what is everyone here for again? And, I really stood up and said, can we just go back to the beginning? And everyone looked at me like I had 10 heads. And I said, we need to start again, because I think you're all, we're not on the same page. So that's how it was one of those things where it was like a rescue mode.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't, nobody else was doing it, and we weren't getting anywhere. We were just spinning our wheels. So I just kind of stepped up to actually rescue the situation.
Well, what I love about your story, and I think it shows charisma as well as leadership, is that what you did, if you had asked people for permission to do it, people would have been like, well, why would we do that? But in actually just forging ahead and creating the situation that was necessary, actually, people fell in line, even if you had asked them consciously, because it was what they needed. They just don't, sometimes people don't realize what they need until they get it or until they see it presented.
Yeah, it's like eat your vegetables. That's exactly right.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing that story. I think folks can learn a lot from that, and thanks so much, Janice.
Thank you, Joe.
So Janice, thank you so much for sharing that story on Charisma Corner. I think that story was really rad. And I don't say rad to date myself or to bring back an expression which is probably best left in the past, but it's an acronym that really highlights some of the insights from your story. So the first letter in rad is R. And what Janice did, which was so great and helped her be more charismatic, was she read the room, right? R for read. So she's in this situation and she can kind of see that it's not going the way she needs it to go. She can see that people are not emotionally in the place where they need to be engaged and contributing and giving her and the company what's really needed. The reason why they were invited to the room, they're not able to access it because there's a barrier there. So the R in RAD is she was able to read the situation. The A is adapt. So Janice normally would run these meetings a certain way, but in this case, that might have worked before, but today it wasn't working. So she had two choices at that point. She could just keep going down the road, doing the same thing she normally does, and she'll probably get the same response, which is not a good response in this meeting. Or she can adapt and change what she's doing to try to get a better result. And in this case, that's what she did. She adapted. So R for read and A for adapt. And the final thing she did, the D, is she delivered. And by delivered, I mean she did the things that were needed in that room at that moment for those coworkers to really kind of be shook up and engaged and sort of changing their emotional state to one where, yes, now I'm contributing and I'm sharing my ideas and we're debating and really giving the things that they had inside. She was able to deliver by doing things that maybe she wasn't normally used to doing or comfortable, but she did that because that's what was required for the situation. So R, she read the room, A, she adapted, and D, she delivered. And that's why that meeting was really rad in terms of Janice's results. So thank you so much, Janice, for sharing that story with us. It was a great first Charisma Corner. So now you may be thinking, okay, Joe, maybe I'm starting to buy what you're saying about charisma and why it actually works, but how do I get there? Right? It's no good for me to understand if I don't actually have the tools to help me get there. Well, I think that's a great point. And one of the things I'd love to share with you that I've started to develop are charisma katas. And a kata, for those of you who aren't familiar, typically it's a term used in martial arts to describe a prescribed set of movements, in this case, physical movements, that are done over and over again until they become sort of instinctual and natural. Now, we're not going to be jumping around today, but the kata we'll be talking about here, the charisma kata, is more about how you interact with people and getting into a pattern of understanding the flow of things you would do. So when that situation arises, you kind of instinctually know what to do. Here's the problem with a checklist or trying to strategize what to do when you're in front of someone. One, it's too slow, right? So you can't be there when you're talking to someone and stop and be like, what is that checklist? And you really, I guess you could, but it's not great. You shouldn't check your phone and say, let me look up that checklist. Point number one, this is what I'm going to do. It's not really great. And it doesn't work because people can kind of feel the stiffness and the awkwardness to it, and your timing will be totally off. The second reason is that people will sense that you're doing something, right? That you're trying to do something to be charismatic, and they will feel manipulated and it'll feel kind of off. So that's why it's better to be responding naturally and reacting based on you understanding how these things work ahead of time. And that's what the kata is for. So you practice this over and over again. So eventually, when it comes time to do it, it just becomes second nature to you, right? It's like hitting a tennis ball with a racket or hitting a golf ball or, driving a car, riding a bike. You don't think about it, you just do it because you've done all the practicing before. And I can also tell you that all of you know katas and have done them before. I can guarantee you have. So here's a great example. What's 2 times 2? What's 2 times 3? What's 2 times 4? Now notice how you didn't have to go take out a calculator and look it up. You knew 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 4 is 8. And how did you know that? Because you've been doing multiplication tables since elementary school. That was your kata, right? It got drilled into your head by your teachers, maybe your parents. Maybe there were many tears. Sorry if I bring back math phobia memories, but maybe there were tears because you were having trouble with like 11 times 11. But eventually you got to the point where for most of the multiplication table, it just comes back to you. So that's what a kata is, and that's how you can respond more naturally and be more effective in being charismatic, is by using and learning these charisma katas as opposed to trying to refer to a checklist from an article you read one day or a book even and trying to recall, was that in chapter 5 or chapter 6 on presence? What was that? It's not going to work. So here is charisma kata number 1. I call it blank paper. So here's what you're going to do. Step 1. You're going to ask the person a question about how they're feeling. So by that, I don't mean how are you doing or what's up, because those are not real questions. Those are sort of social nicety questions. They're even sometimes rhetorical questions. People don't really expect to have to respond to that. So you have to ask a real question, and you have to ask it with sincerity. Like, I'm really curious. How are you feeling today? And just really ask it with sincerity. And you might even get a weird look or a double take. And if you do, just ask it again and show them that you really want to know how they're feeling today, right? Now, what can happen though is you'll have a certain subset of people they're just not going to play that, right? So they will try to avoid that question or they won't want to answer that question. For that sort of person, there's a separate but similar technique where instead of asking them to respond, you actually make a statement and you tell them how you think they're feeling. Now, typically this type of person will either love to respond by telling you, yeah, you're right, and this is exactly how I feel and this is why, or if you've got it wrong, that's okay, because now they're going to love telling you how they feel and how what you thought they felt was totally wrong. So either way, you're going to get more information. They're going to start talking to you about how they feel. So that's step number 1. Ask a feeling question or make a feeling statement. Step number 2 is be a blank sheet of paper. So as they're responding to you, imagine that you are a blank sheet of paper and their words that are coming out and also the energy that's coming from them is like words being written on you. And you as the blank sheet of paper, you're not doing anything. You're just there. You're just allowing their words to be written on you and absorbed. And just you're staying engaged and you're letting them know you're listening to them, but you're not asking questions. You're not asking open-ended questions. You're not doing anything specific. You're just being a blank sheet of paper, right? So step 1, ask a feeling question or make a feeling statement. Step 2, be a blank sheet of paper. Step 3, and this is where the magic happens. At a certain point, and I like to imagine it, the paper being half full, something's going to click for you, and you're really going to start to get a sense of where this person is and what's going on with them. Why are you going to feel that? Because you've really been absorbing and listening, and all that information is coming back, and you are really processing it in a way that you normally don't, right? Normally, what are we doing? We're thinking about what we're going to say next, or what episode am I on that Netflix show? What am I going to watch tonight? Or what do I want to do this weekend? You're not really paying attention, so you're missing all that information. But by doing this, you're really getting a better sense. So in this step 3, what you're going to do is when that paper is half full and you get that feeling, now and only now, you're going to start to write as well. And by write, I mean adding to the conversation based on what you know about how they're feeling and where they're going as well, and where they need to go. So by adding, you are going to tell them how you're feeling, tell them things about similarities or differences between what they were saying. You're going to be asking questions to fill in gaps about what they said, maybe things that you were curious or things that you didn't understand. It doesn't matter exactly what you do, but the principle is now you are also writing, and you're both writing together on this piece of paper to create a conversation that's going to bring them and you emotionally to a better place, which is a place to have a really engaged, great conversation, to bond and to understand a little bit more about each other. And you will be amazed at how people respond to this. So it's nothing that you don't know how to do. You know how to listen, you know how to pay attention, and you know how to ask questions and participate in a conversation. The difference here is you're doing it specifically in a way and in a sequence which is going to maximize the charismatic effect, because here you're sensing and ultimately delivering exactly what is needed from an emotional perspective with that person at that time. So thank you so much for listening to this first episode of the Charisma Chronicles. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like below and subscribe to the newsletter. I can never remember where the thing is, but subscribe to the newsletter and make sure you hit the bell so you'll be reminded when new episodes are coming. And I look forward to speaking to you next time on the next episode of the Charisma Chronicles. Thank you.